My name is Chloe Anderson, 28 years old, and I never thought my financial success would become my family's biggest weapon against me. I'd always dreamed of making my father proud at his retirement party after 35 years at the same company. Instead, I stood frozen by the buffet table as my Aunt Janet's words cut through the celebratory chatter. "We used your bonus to cover the catering." My brother's sneer followed. "Think of it as paying us back for existing." That moment changed everything. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join my journey. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago, I always saw my father Thomas as the epitome of hard work and dedication. For 35 years, he dragged himself out of bed every morning at 5 a.m. to make the commute to the insurance company where he worked as an underwriter. He never complained, even when the winter winds whipped through the city streets and temperatures dropped below zero. Our family life changed dramatically when my mother Diana was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer when I was 12. For 2 years, our lives revolved around hospital visits, medication schedules, and my father working overtime to cover the mounting medical bills. Despite the best treatments available, we lost her when I was 14, leaving a gaping hole in our family that would never truly heal. After Mom died, my brother James, who was 16 at the time, changed. Where once he'd been protective and kind, grief transformed him into someone unrecognizable. He started skipping school, staying out all night, and demanding money from Dad for increasingly extravagant purchases. My father, consumed by his own grief and working longer hours than ever, didn't have the emotional bandwidth to address James's behavior. That's when Aunt Janet, my father's older sister, swooped in. "You need help, Thomas," she insisted, boxes already packed in her car. "I'll move in and take care of the children while you work." What started as temporary assistance quickly became permanent, and with it came a shift in our family dynamic that I was too young to fully comprehend. Aunt Janet took complete control of our household finances. "Your father works too hard to worry about money," she would say whenever I questioned where our funds were going. Meanwhile, James's allowance doubled, then tripled, while I was told we needed to budget carefully whenever I needed new clothes or school supplies. By 16, I was working after school at a local coffee shop. By 17, I had added weekend shifts at a bookstore. Not because my father couldn't provide for me, but because Aunt Janet controlled the purse strings with such authority that asking for anything felt like begging. I opened my own bank account, kept my earnings separate, and made a promise to myself I would become completely financially independent. Through high school, I maintained a perfect GPA. While working those two jobs, I secured scholarships that covered most of my college expenses at the University of Illinois, where I majored in computer science. During college, I worked in the university's IT department and took summer internships that paid well above average. Every step was calculated, every decision made with financial security in mind. My hard work paid off when I landed a position at Tech Future, a prestigious tech company in San Francisco, right after graduation. The starting salary was more money than I had ever seen, and within 3 years, I had been promoted twice. By 28, I was leading a team of developers and earning well into the six figures. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, my father's health had begun to deteriorate. Years of stress and overwork had led to high blood pressure, and at 63, he suffered a minor heart attack. It was the wake-up call that convinced him to finally retire after 35 years with the same company. When he called to tell me the news, I immediately knew I wanted to do something special to celebrate his career. "Dad, you deserve an amazing retirement party," I told him. "Let me help plan something that honors everything you've accomplished." What I didn't realize was that Aunt Janet and James had already begun making plans of their own. When I mentioned the party during our next family video call, Janet smiled in that tight way of hers. "Oh, James and I have been discussing that. We've got some wonderful ideas." "Great," I said, genuinely pleased that they wanted to contribute. "I just got my year-end bonus, and I'd be happy to help with some of the expenses." The bonus was substantial $50,000 that reflected the success of a major project I'd led. I had plans for that money, including a down payment on a condo, but I was willing to use a portion to give my father the celebration he deserved. What I didn't say was, "I'll pay for everything." What I didn't agree to was, "Take as much of my money as you want." but somehow that's what Janet and James heard, or at least what they chose to hear. Over the following weeks, our conversations about the party grew increasingly strange. Janet would mention venues I'd never heard of, then quickly change the subject when I asked about costs. James talked about flying in relatives from across the country without discussing who would pay for their tickets. Whenever I tried to nail down a budget, one of them would say, "Don't worry about it, Chloe, we've got it handled." A growing sense of discomfort settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. This was about Dad, I told myself, about honoring his decades of sacrifice for our family. If Janet and James were being a bit secretive or controlling, well, that was nothing new. I could handle it for Dad's sake. Looking back, I should have recognized the signs. The vague answers, the changed subjects, the gentle but persistent questions about my finances that seemed unrelated to the party. But loyalty and love can be powerful blinders, especially when it comes to family. One week before the retirement party, I flew home to Chicago. The moment I stepped off the plane, the familiar weight of family expectations settled onto my shoulders. James picked me up from the airport, immediately launching into complaints about his struggling music career and how no one appreciated his talent. I nodded and made sympathetic noises, noticing he was driving a brand new SUV. "Nice car," I commented during a pause in his monologue. "When did you get it?" "About a month ago," he said casually. "Got a great deal." Anyway, as I was saying about my band, when we arrived at our childhood home, Aunt Janet greeted me with her customary brief hug and critical once-over. "San Francisco agrees with you," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You're looking very California." Dad's face lit up when he saw me, and for a moment all the tension melted away as he wrapped me in a bear hug. "There's my girl," he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "The big shot from Silicon Valley." Unlike when Janet or James referenced my career, when Dad said it, there was only pride. That evening over dinner, I tried to discuss the retirement party plans. "So I'd love to hear more about the venue," I began. "And maybe we could go over the guest list together." Janet waved her hand dismissively. "Everything's arranged, Chloe. The Lakeview Country Club is perfect, and we've invited all the right people. Your father deserves the best." The Lakeview Country Club, I nearly choked on my water. It was one of the most expensive venues in Chicago. "That sounds elaborate," I said carefully. "I was thinking something more intimate, maybe at Sullivan's Steakhouse, where Dad always loved to celebrate special occasions." "Sullivan's?" James scoffed. "That's hardly appropriate for 35 years of service. Dad deserves the best, not some chain restaurant." Dad looked uncomfortable. "The country club does seem rather fancy." "Nonsense," Janet cut him off. "You only retire once, Thomas. Besides, it's all arranged. Deposits paid and everything." "Deposits?" I asked. "Who paid the deposits?" A moment of awkward silence followed before Janet said smoothly, "It's all been handled. You just need to enjoy your father's special day." Over the next few days, I discovered just how handled everything was. The catering was from an exclusive service that specialized in gourmet dining experiences. The decorations included custom floral arrangements and personalized memorabilia displays. A professional photographer and videographer had been hired, and James had arranged for his band to perform along with several other musician friends, all of whom expected to be paid for their time. When I asked my father about these arrangements, he seemed bewildered. "Janet and James have been taking care of everything," he said. "They keep telling me not to worry about the details." A pattern I recognized all too well from my childhood. Dad working himself to exhaustion, while Janet controlled every aspect of our home life, including finances. He had always trusted her implicitly, perhaps out of gratitude for her stepping in after Mom died, or perhaps because it was easier than confronting the truth. 3 days before the party, I made a direct attempt to discuss money with Janet. "I'd like to understand the total budget for the party," I said firmly. "Since I offered to help with expenses, I need to know what I'm committing to." Janet's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Chloe, always so concerned about dollars and cents. That's why you're successful, I suppose, but this is family. We don't need to be so formal about who pays for what." "Actually, we do," I insisted. I budgeted a certain amount for the party, and I need to know if that's being exceeded. Your Silicon Valley money makes our Chicago budgets look like pocket change, she replied with a little laugh. James and I thought it would be simplest if you just covered everything given your advantages. The assumption stung, but before I could respond, we were interrupted by the caterer calling to confirm final details. Janet took the call in another room, effectively ending our conversation. That evening, I discovered something even more disturbing. While looking for a spare charger in my father's desk drawer, I came across his retirement account statements. The balance was shockingly low for someone who had worked steadily for 35 years. When I gently questioned him about it, his face clouded. Well, there have been expenses, he said vaguely. James needed help with his music career, and the house needed repairs. Janet manages all that for me. Further careful questioning revealed that James had been borrowing from our father's accounts for years, with Janet facilitating the transfers. Car payments, rent when he couldn't make it, equipment for his band, even vacations, all funded by our father's dwindling retirement savings. Meanwhile, I had been completely self-sufficient since college, never asking for a dime. The injustice burned, but my concern for my father's financial future burned hotter. How would he support himself if his savings were already depleted before retirement officially began? The night before the party, these concerns came to a head when I overheard James on the phone bragging to a friend about the epic party that his rich sister was throwing. When he hung up, I confronted him. James, I need to understand exactly how much this party is costing and what you're expecting me to pay for. He looked at me with genuine surprise. All of it, obviously. You're the one with the fancy job and the big bonus. The rest of us have been here taking care of Dad while you've been living it up in California. Taking care of him, I repeated incredulously. By draining his retirement accounts. James's face darkened. You don't know anything about what it's been like here. Some of us didn't get the golden opportunities you did. We grew up in the same house with the same opportunities, I reminded him. I worked multiple jobs through high school and college. Nothing was handed to me. Whatever helps you sleep at night, he sneered, walking away and ending the conversation. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with calculations and growing dread about what the next day would bring. But I told myself it was just one day, one expensive day to honor my father's career and sacrifice. I could handle it, even if the way it had been arranged felt manipulative and wrong. What I didn't realize was that the financial exploitation had only just begun. The morning of Dad's retirement party dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day in Chicago. I pushed aside my lingering concerns and focused on making the day special for him. I helped him select a tie to complement his new suit, one I had sent as a gift the previous month. You know, he said as I adjusted his collar, your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become. Strong, independent, successful. His eyes grew misty. Sometimes I look at you and see her so clearly. The moment was so genuine, so precious, that I felt renewed determination to get through the day with grace regardless of the family tension or financial concerns. This was about Dad, not about Janet or James or money. When we arrived at the Lakeview Country Club, I had to admit the venue was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake, crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and elegant flower arrangements adorned every table. Dad's face lit up as he took it all in, and for a moment, I thought perhaps the extravagance was worth it. Then I saw the open bar with premium liquors, the ice sculpture of the insurance company's logo, the string quartet playing in the corner, and my mental calculator started running again. This wasn't just expensive, it was exorbitant. Janet approached wearing a designer dress I'd never seen before. Isn't it wonderful? She gushed. Your father deserves nothing but the best. I bit back the observation that the best seemed to coincide with her tastes rather than my father's more modest preferences. Dad would have been just as happy, probably happier, with a casual gathering at his favorite restaurant. The guests began to arrive, Dad's colleagues from over the years, old friends, extended family. Many expressed surprise at the lavish setting. Tom always seemed so frugal, one of his oldest coworkers commented to me. This must have been quite an investment. I smiled tightly and changed the subject. During the champagne toast, I took the microphone to honor my father's career. For 35 years, I began. My father has exemplified dedication, integrity, and hard work. He never missed a day, never complained about long hours, and always put his clients and his family first. Dad, your career has been a testament to the values you live by, and I'm so proud to be your daughter. The room applauded warmly, and I could see Dad blinking back tears. It was a perfect moment until Aunt Janet stepped forward and took the microphone from my hand. And we must thank Chloe, she added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, for her tremendous generosity in making this wonderful celebration possible. Her success has allowed us to honor Thomas properly with no expense spared. A murmur went through the room as all eyes turned to me. I felt my cheeks burning but maintained a composed expression. This wasn't the time or place to correct the record. As the afternoon progressed, James made several more references to my Silicon Valley money and how some of us hit the career jackpot. Each comment was framed as a joke, but the underlying resentment was unmistakable. Several of Dad's friends looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing the tension. The breaking point came during the lunch service. I was standing near the buffet table watching my father laugh with his former boss when Janet approached with the catering manager. "Chloe, darling," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Mr. Simmons needs to confirm the final payment method. I told him you'd handle it, of course." I blinked in surprise. "I thought you said the deposits were handled." "Oh, the deposits, yes." Janet laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "But the balance is due today. Didn't I mention that we used your bonus to cover the catering?" I froze. "You what? How would you even access my bonus?" James appeared at that moment, plate piled high with the gourmet offerings. "Think of it as paying us back for existing," he sneered. "Family supports family rights, sis." Several nearby guests fell silent, clearly overhearing the exchange. The catering manager looked deeply uncomfortable. "I'll handle this privately," I told him quietly, leading him away from the table. Once out of earshot, I learned that the catering bill alone was over $15,000, and nothing had been paid beyond a small deposit. In a daze, I provided my credit card, assuring him there was no problem. I returned to the party, maintaining a smile that felt painted on while inside I was reeling. How could they have used my bonus when they shouldn't have had access to my accounts? What did that mean? For the rest of the afternoon, I went through the motions. Cutting cake, thanking guests for coming, watching my father receive gifts and well wishes. He seemed genuinely happy, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension and my growing sense of dread. When I excused myself to use the restroom, my childhood friend Megan followed me. We'd grown up on the same block and kept in touch despite the distance. "Chloe, are you okay?" she asked once we were alone. "That thing with your aunt and brother seemed really uncomfortable." The concern in her voice nearly broke my composure. "They've changed," I said simply. "Or maybe they were always like this and I just didn't see it clearly." Megan's expression grew serious. "I've watched this dynamic for years, Chloe. The way Janet controls everything, the way James takes and takes. But you've been away building your own life. Maybe that distance has helped you see things more clearly." She hesitated, then added, "My mom's a financial advisor. She's seen families like this before. People who feel entitled to someone else's success, who use guilt and obligation to extract resources. It's a form of exploitation even if they don't see it that way." Her words hit me like a physical blow, naming the discomfort I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. Financial exploitation. From my own family. "I should get back," I said, reapplying my lipstick with a steady hand that belied my inner turmoil. "It's Dad's day, everything else can wait." But as I rejoined the celebration, watching Janet direct the servers with imperious gestures, and James enjoying his third plate of expensive food, a resolve began to form within me. When this day was over, I would get answers. I would set boundaries. And if necessary, I would protect myself, even from family. The party concluded with tearful goodbyes and promises to stay in touch from Dad's colleagues. I quietly settled all the outstanding balances, the total making my stomach clench, but maintaining a gracious smile throughout. This was still my father's day, and I wouldn't let anything tarnish it for him. But beneath my calm exterior, questions multiplied and suspicions grew. What exactly had Janet meant about using my bonus? How deep did this financial entanglement go? And most importantly, how was I going to untangle myself without hurting my father in the process? The morning after the retirement party, I came downstairs to find Janet making coffee as if nothing unusual had happened. James was nowhere to be seen, likely sleeping off the previous day's indulgences. Dad sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper and looking content. "Good morning," I said cautiously, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Dad, did you enjoy your party?" His face lit up. "It was wonderful, Chloe. Seeing everyone in one place, all those people from different parts of my career. I can't thank you enough for making it happen." Janet shot me a smug look over his head as if to say, "See, it was worth it." After Dad left to meet a friend for breakfast, I confronted Janet directly. "We need to talk about what you said yesterday, about using my bonus for the catering." She waved her hand dismissively. "Figure of speech, dear. You know how these things go. Family pools resources." "But we never agreed on a budget," I persisted. "And I certainly never agreed to pay for everything. The total came to over $40,000. Janet's expression hardened slightly. "Well, your father deserves the best. And since you're doing so well in California, it seemed only right that you should contribute. James and I have been here taking care of everything while you've been gone. That doesn't give you the right to volunteer my money without discussing it first," I said firmly. "Oh, Chloe always so rigid about finances. It's just money. Family is what matters." The conversation went nowhere with Janet alternating between dismissing my concerns and subtly suggesting I was being selfish for questioning family expenses. When James finally appeared around noon, his response was even less helpful. "You can afford it," he said bluntly when I raised the issue. "Stop being so stingy." My growing frustration led me to start looking more carefully at what exactly had happened. I gathered receipts from the party, discovering several items that seemed unrelated, including a designer handbag that matched the one Janet had carried, and equipment that looked suspiciously like what James's band used. When I tried to discuss the financial situation with my father, he seemed confused and uncomfortable. "Janet handles all that," he said repeatedly. "I'm sure she wouldn't do anything inappropriate." But the more I pressed gently, the more I realized he had no real understanding of his own financial situation. He couldn't tell me the balance of his accounts, what his monthly expenses were, or even if his mortgage was paid off. All questions that someone on the verge of retirement should be able to answer easily. When I asked to see recent bank statements just to help him organize his retirement finances, Janet intervened. "Your father doesn't need the stress of financial discussions right now," she insisted. "I've been handling everything for years, and it's all under control." The familiar pattern from my childhood reasserted itself, but I was no longer a teenager who could be dismissed so easily. When Janet and James left the house the following day, I helped my father locate his financial documents, and what I found shocked me to my core. My name was on accounts I'd never opened, loan applications I'd never signed, credit cards I'd never applied for, all with my social security number and what appeared to be my forged signature. "Dad," I asked carefully, "did you know about these accounts in my name?" He looked genuinely bewildered. "Janet said she was helping you establish credit while you were in college. She said you knew about it." My heart sank. I had established my own credit meticulously from the age of 18. These accounts were not only unnecessary, but potentially damaging to my financial health, especially if they carried balances or late payments. Further investigation revealed the most disturbing fact of all regular transfers, from my personal accounts to a joint account I had never authorized, which Janet and James both had access to. The transfers had begun small just after I started my job in San Francisco and had grown larger as my salary increased. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had been siphoning money from my accounts for years. My bonus hadn't just paid for the party, it had been systematically diverted without my knowledge or consent. I spent that night in my childhood bedroom, sleepless, researching identity theft and financial abuse. The descriptions matched my situation with disturbing accuracy. Family members were among the most common perpetrators, using emotional manipulation and access to personal information to commit their crimes. The next day, I called in sick to my remote work meetings and sought out a lawyer specializing in identity theft. I brought copies of all the documents I'd found, and her assessment was blunt. "This is textbook identity theft and fraud," she told me, pointing to the forged signatures. "The fact that they're family doesn't make it legal or acceptable." "What are my options?" I asked, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil inside. "You can report this to the police, which would likely result in criminal charges against your aunt and brother. Or you can handle it privately, closing accounts, disputing fraudulent charges, and setting clear boundaries going forward. But either way, you need to protect yourself immediately. This kind of exploitation rarely stops on its own." I couldn't imagine having my family members arrested, not with my father still dependent on them in many ways. But I also couldn't allow the exploitation to continue. The lawyer helped me develop a plan that would protect my finances, while giving me time to figure out the more complicated family dynamics. That night, I lay awake again, memories flooding back with new context. Janet helping with my college applications and insisting on seeing my financial aid packages. James borrowing my first credit card for an emergency and returning it with unexplained charges. The family tradition of sharing social security numbers and birthdays in case of emergency. What I had interpreted as normal family intimacy now revealed itself as something more sinister, a systematic dismantling of financial boundaries that had laid the groundwork for years of exploitation. The hardest part was reconciling the people I loved with their actions. My aunt, who had stepped in when we lost our mother. My brother, who had once protected me from playground bullies. How had we come to this? But as dawn broke on the third day after the party, my resolve solidified. Love did not excuse exploitation. Family ties did not make financial abuse acceptable, and my own financial security was not something I should sacrifice on the altar of family harmony. With clear eyes and a heavy heart, I began gathering all the evidence I would need for what came next. 3 days after my father's retirement party, I called a family meeting. I had spent those days documenting everything, consulting with the lawyer, and preparing myself emotionally for what would undoubtedly be a difficult confrontation. I chose the dining room table, a neutral space, where we had shared countless meals together, hoping that the familiarity might soften what was to come. "I've discovered some concerning financial issues that we need to discuss." I began, my voice calm, despite the rapid beating of my heart. Janet immediately looked annoyed. "If this is still about the party expenses, Chloe, I think you're being rather petty. It was a beautiful event that everyone enjoyed." "This goes beyond the party," I replied, sliding a folder across the table. "This is about unauthorized access to my account's identity theft and financial fraud." The silence that followed was deafening. My father looked confused. Janet's expression froze, and James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What exactly are you accusing us of?" Janet finally asked, her voice brittle. In response, I laid out the evidence methodically. The accounts opened in my name without my knowledge, the forged signatures on loan documents, the systematic transfers from my personal accounts that had been occurring for years. "I never authorized any of this," I stated firmly. "I never gave permission for anyone to access my accounts or use my identity to open new ones." James was the first to go on the offensive. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Families share resources. You've always been so uptight about money, even when we were kids." "Sharing is consensual," I countered. "Taking without permission is theft, even among family members." Janet attempted a different approach, her voice softening into the cajoling tone she had used throughout my childhood. "Chloe, darling, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. When you said you wanted to help with your father's retirement, we assumed that meant you were willing to contribute financially. After all, you're doing so well. And we've been here taking care of everything in Chicago." "Contributing is not the same as having my accounts drained without my knowledge," I replied. "And these accounts and loans in my name date back years long before Dad's retirement was even being discussed." My father had remained silent throughout this exchange, his expression growing increasingly distressed. Finally, he spoke. "Janet, is this true? Have you been using Chloe's information to open accounts?" Janet's demeanor changed instantly. "It was for the family, Thomas. Everything I've ever done has been for this family." When money was tight, when James needed help with his career, when the house needed repairs, I found solutions. Is that so wrong? It's wrong when those solutions involve fraud and identity theft, I said quietly. We're family, Janet insisted, as if this single fact negated all legal and ethical considerations. We share everything. No, I corrected her. We don't, not without consent. James's approach shifted from defensive to aggressive. You've always thought you were better than us, haven't you? With your fancy degree and your Silicon Valley job. Meanwhile, I've been stuck here trying to make a music career work in a city that doesn't appreciate real talent taking care of Dad when he got sick. Taking care of him? I echoed incredulously. By draining his retirement accounts to fund your band equipment and trips to music festivals? That's not care, James. That's exploitation. My father looked stricken. James, you said those withdrawals were for household expenses. The conversation deteriorated further as more truths came to light. The extent of James's financial dependence, Janet's control over all family resources, the systematic way they had been leveraging my success to fund their lifestyles. But the final revelation, the one that truly broke something inside me, came when I mentioned the loan against my San Francisco condo. What loan? I asked, genuinely confused when Janet referenced using it to pay for James's new car. Their expressions told me everything. Using personal information they had access to, they had somehow taken out a home equity line of credit against my property, one I hadn't authorized, and wasn't even aware existed. In that moment, watching their faces shift from defensive to guilty, I made my decision. The lawyer had outlined my options and I had been unsure which path to take. Now I knew. I'm cutting financial ties completely. I announced, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. I'm closing every account you have access to, disputing all fraudulent charges, and establishing completely separate finances going forward. The panic that crossed their faces would have been almost comical if the situation weren't so heartbreaking. You can't do that, Janet sputtered. What about your father's needs? I'll support Dad directly, I clarified. We'll set up an account that only he and I can access for his legitimate expenses. But you and James will no longer have any access to my resources. This is abandonment, James accused, his face flushing with anger. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, James? I asked quietly. Besides, use my identity to secure loans and drain my accounts without consent. My father finally found his voice again, tears streaming down his face. Can't we work this out as a family without all these harsh measures? His plea nearly broke me. I had always been the peacekeeper, the one who accommodated others to maintain harmony. But the lawyer's words echoed in my mind. This kind of exploitation rarely stops on its own. I'm sorry, Dad, I said gently, but this has gone too far. I need to protect myself, and frankly, I need to protect you too. Janet and James have been taking advantage of both of us for years. For the next hour, I outlined exactly what would happen. I would be closing all compromised accounts immediately. I had already frozen my credit to prevent new accounts from being opened. I had prepared a cease and desist letter regarding the identity theft, which I strongly preferred not to escalate to police involvement. Janet alternated between tearful pleas and cold anger. James stormed out, then returned to make threats about family loyalty and consequences. Through it all, my father sat in stunned silence, occasionally attempting to mediate, but clearly overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. By the end of the day, I had emptied and closed every account they had access to. I had transferred my remaining funds to new secure accounts at different institutions. I had changed all my passwords, set up advanced security measures, and put fraud alerts on my credit reports. When I finally retreated to my childhood bedroom to pack my things, Janet appeared in the doorway. You'll regret this, she said, her voice cold. Family is all we have in the end, and you're throwing it away over money. I looked at her, this woman who had stepped in when we lost our mother, who had in many ways shaped my childhood, and felt an overwhelming sadness. This isn't about money, I told her quietly. It's about trust, respect, and consent. You can't take from someone without permission and call it family. I left that night amid angry recriminations from Janet and James and confused, tearful pleas from my father. As I closed the door of my rideshare headed to the airport earlier than planned, I felt both a crushing weight and a strange lightness. Something had ended irrevocably, but something else, something healthier, had the space to begin. The flight back to San Francisco passed in a blur of exhaustion and emotional numbness. I had barely slept in days, and the confrontation had drained what little energy I had left. When I finally unlocked the door to my apartment, I dropped my bags in the entryway and sank onto the couch, too tired even to cry. My phone had been buzzing with messages since I left Chicago, mostly angry texts from James and guilt-laden voicemails from Janet. I silenced it and closed my eyes, trying to process everything that had happened. The next morning, I called my manager at Tech Future and requested emergency personal leave. Julia had always been supportive, and after hearing a simplified version of what had happened, she immediately approved 2 weeks off. "Take care of yourself, Chloe," she said warmly. "Your team has everything under control. Focus on what you need right now." What I needed, it turned out, was to rebuild my financial security from the ground up. I spent days on calls with banks, credit card companies, and credit bureaus. I disputed fraudulent charges, closed compromised accounts, and filed formal reports of identity theft. I changed every password, set up two-factor authentication everywhere, and even got a new phone number to prevent unauthorized access. The lawyer I had consulted in Chicago connected me with a colleague in San Francisco who specialized in financial recovery after identity theft. The process was tedious and often frustrating, but with professional guidance, I gradually untangled the web of financial exploitation that had been woven around me. The emotional aftermath was harder to address. I alternated between anger, grief, guilt, and a profound sense of betrayal. How could the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally have treated me this way? Was I overreacting by cutting ties so completely? Should I have found a gentler solution for my father's sake? After a week of wrestling with these questions alone, I realized I needed professional support for this aspect as well. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma and began weekly sessions. Dr. Melanie Park listened to my story with compassion and insight. "What you're describing is financial abuse," she confirmed in our first session. "It's particularly complicated when it comes from family members because it's tangled up with legitimate bonds of love and shared history." She helped me understand that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, but necessary for healthy relationships. That my guilt was a programmed response to breaking family patterns, not an indication that I was doing something wrong. That grief was a natural reaction to losing the image of family I had held onto, despite evidence to the contrary. Meanwhile, the messages from Chicago continued. James alternated between angry accusations and desperate pleas for financial help, revealing just how dependent he had become on access to my resources. Janet's approach was more subtle, using my father's distress as leverage to try to reestablish contact and implicitly access. I blocked both their numbers after consulting with Dr. Park, who emphasized that temporary distance was sometimes necessary to establish new, healthier patterns of interaction. My father's messages were harder to ignore, his confusion and hurt evident in every word. I responded to him directly with kindness, but firmness about my new boundaries. 2 weeks into my leave, I received a call from Megan, my childhood friend, who had checked on me during the retirement party. "I heard what happened," she said without preamble. "My mom ran into your dad at the grocery store. He seemed pretty shaken up. It's been a difficult time." I acknowledged, grateful to speak with someone who knew my family but wasn't enmeshed in the current drama. "For what it's worth," Megan said after a pause, "my mom says what you did was brave. She's seen too many families where this kind of financial entanglement destroys everyone involved. Setting boundaries might feel harsh now, but it's the only way to build something healthier." That conversation led to others with Megan, who became an unexpected source of support. Having known my family for years, she could provide perspective without the emotional fog that clouded my own view. She confirmed patterns I had suspected, but doubted reminded me of incidents I had forgotten, and generally validated my experience in a way that helped me trust my own perceptions. She also introduced me to her cousin Alex, who had gone through a similar experience with his stepfather. Talking with someone who truly understood the unique pain of family financial abuse was incredibly healing. Alex connected me with an online support group specifically for survivors of family financial exploitation. In that group, I found stories that mirrored mine with uncanny similarity: the gradual boundary violations, the gaslighting when concerns were raised, the way money became a proxy for control and power. Most importantly, I found people who had established new healthy relationships with family after setting firm boundaries, giving me hope that all was not lost. As I approached the end of my leave, I began to feel stronger, more centered. The practical aspects of financial recovery were well underway. My credit was slowly being restored, the fraudulent accounts closed, the unauthorized loans disputed. I had set up a separate account for my father's legitimate needs, with clear documentation and transparency about how those funds could be used. The emotional recovery would take longer, but I had tools now and support. I returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of my own worth beyond what I could financially provide to others. 6 months after the retirement party, I received news that seemed like validation of my difficult choices. I was promoted to senior development lead with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. My boss specifically cited my resilience and problem-solving skills as key factors in the decision. The promotion came with an unexpected sense of freedom. Not just financial freedom, though that was certainly part of it, but a deeper sense of having claimed my right to set boundaries and determine how my resources, both material and emotional, would be shared. I celebrated with friends who had supported me through the difficult months, people who celebrated my success without feeling entitled to it. The contrast to my family's reaction to my previous achievements was stark and illuminating. Around the 8-month mark, I received a message from my father that differed from his previous communications. Instead of confused hurt or pleas to reconcile with Janet and James, he wrote, "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Chloe. I met with a financial advisor, something I should have done years ago. She helped me understand some of what happened with our family finances. I owe you an apology for not being more aware, for not protecting you better. If you're willing, I'd like to talk." It was the first acknowledgement from anyone in my family that what had happened was wrong, that I deserved better. It was a small step, but a significant one. With cautious optimism, I agreed to a video call, the first direct contact, since I had left Chicago 8 months earlier. During that call, I learned that my father had made some significant changes. He had moved into a smaller apartment, one that Janet did not have access to. He was managing his own finances for the first time in decades, with professional help. Most surprisingly, he had established boundaries with James regarding financial support. "It hasn't been easy," he admitted, his face looking both older and somehow more present than I remembered. "James isn't speaking to me right now. Janet says I've betrayed the family by listening to outside influences, but I feel clearer than I have in years." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning, a foundation upon which something new and healthier might be built, brick by careful brick. 1 year after my father's retirement party, I stood on the balcony of my new condo in San Francisco, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The past 12 months had transformed my life in ways I never could have anticipated when I boarded that flight to Chicago, excited to celebrate my father's career milestone. The journey hadn't been linear or easy. There had been setbacks, along with progress days when grief overwhelmed me, and I questioned every decision. But looking back, I could see how each difficult choice had led me to a place of greater authenticity and peace. My father had continued his journey toward independence and self-awareness. Our relationship, while changed, had gradually strengthened as we built new patterns of interaction based on mutual respect rather than exploitation or obligation. We spoke weekly, now honest conversations that acknowledged the past while focusing primarily on the present and future. 3 months earlier, he had made the difficult decision to establish firm boundaries with Janet after discovering she had attempted to open a credit card in his name. It was the final push he needed to recognize the unhealthy dynamics that had persisted for decades. "I let her take control after your mother died because it was easier than facing my grief," he admitted during one of our calls. "But the price was too high for all of us." He had moved to Madison, Wisconsin, a smaller city he had always loved, where the cost of living allowed him to stretch his modest retirement savings. With careful budgeting and the supplemental support I provided directly to him, he was comfortable and increasingly content. James remained entrenched in his resentment, refusing contact with me, and speaking to our father only when he wanted something. The last I had heard, he was working at a music store and still pursuing his band career. But without the financial support, he had grown accustomed to progress was slower and required more personal effort. Janet had predictably found another family member to focus her controlling tendencies on a cousin going through a divorce who welcomed the help with finances and childcare. I had warned him gently about establishing clear boundaries, but recognized that each person had to learn these lessons in their own time. My own healing had taken unexpected forms. The online support group for financial abuse survivors had become an important part of my life, and eventually I began sharing my story more widely. What started as anonymous posts in forums evolved into a blog, where I documented my journey of recovery and rebuilding. The response had been overwhelming. So many people recognized their own experiences in my words, particularly the complicated dynamics of family financial exploitation. Messages poured in from others who had faced similar situations, but felt isolated in their experiences. Seeing this need, I worked with a financial education nonprofit to develop a workshop specifically addressing family financial boundaries. Financial Wellness and Family Dynamics covered the warning signs of exploitation strategies for establishing healthy boundaries and resources for recovery. The pilot program at community centers across the Bay Area had been so successful that we were expanding to other cities. Professionally, I had continued to thrive. The promotion I received 6 months after the retirement party had led to further opportunities, and I now led a development team working on projects that aligned with my values. The financial security I had fought so hard to protect allowed me to make career choices based on meaning and growth rather than necessity. My personal relationships had deepened as well. Without the constant drain of family financial exploitation, I had more emotional and material resources to invest in friendships and my community. I volunteered regularly, with a program teaching coding skills to girls from underserved neighborhoods. I dated occasionally, approaching romantic relationships with a clearer understanding of healthy boundaries. Perhaps most significantly, I had developed a new relationship with money itself, where once it had been tangled up with guilt, obligation, and family loyalty. I now saw it as a tool for creating the life I wanted and supporting causes I believed in. I budgeted carefully but generously, balancing saving for the future with enjoying the present and helping others. The most unexpected development came 3 months ago when my father called with news that brought our journey full circle. "I've been thinking about everything that happened last year," he said, his voice steady, "about the retirement party and everything that came after. I want to apologize, Chloe, not just for letting Janet and James take advantage of you, but for not seeing your success for what it really was, evidence of your character and hard work." He paused, and I could hear the emotion in his voice when he continued. "I've been meeting with a therapist, something I never thought I'd do at my age. She's helped me understand how much of our family dynamic was shaped by unprocessed grief after your mother died. It doesn't excuse what happened, but it helps explain it." We talked for hours that day about Mom, about the years after her death, about the ways we had all coped, healthy and unhealthy. It was the most honest conversation we'd had since I was a child, and it healed something deep within me that I hadn't even realized was still wounded. 2 weeks later, he came to visit me in San Francisco, his first trip to see where I lived and worked. We spent a week together building new memories untainted by financial manipulation or unspoken expectations. When he left, our goodbye at the airport felt like a beginning rather than an ending. Looking out over the city now, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. I had learned that true generosity requires consent and transparency, that setting boundaries, while painful in the moment, ultimately allows for more authentic connections, that walking away from toxicity, even when it comes from family, can be an act of self-love rather than selfishness. Most importantly, I had learned that family in its healthiest form is built on mutual respect rather than obligation, on support that empowers, rather than enabling, on love that sets free rather than possessing. The family I had now, some biological and some chosen, reflected those values in ways that nourished rather than depleted me. The journey wasn't over. There would always be new boundaries to establish new patterns, to unlearn new ways to grow. But standing on my balcony as the last light faded from the sky, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever, with my family peace. Not the uneasy peace of appeasement, but the genuine peace that comes from living authentically with clear eyes and an open heart. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself from people you love? Has your journey to financial independence revealed unexpected challenges in your family relationships? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. Like this video, if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about navigating complex family dynamics, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. And remember, sometimes walking away is the first step toward healing.